Javi, yet another midfield maestro turned manager after enjoying a 20-year playing career, winning many titles and working under some of the best tacticians of the past decades. Xavi took over Al Sadd, the side he finished his career with in 2019. But in 2021, Xavi returned to his former club Barcelona, winning a La Liga title and a Supercopa in the 2022-2023 season. However, last night his side crashed out of the Champions League, losing 6-4 on aggregate to PSG in the quarter-final of the competition. Xavi was sent to the stands in the first half following the Araujo red card, choosing not to hide his passion and emotion. But how does Xavi set his teams up and what are his key principles? Let's get into it. So Xavi's philosophy is formed around his 4 Ps, which is positioning, possession, pressure and perception. As you can probably tell from the type of player that Xavi was, he is obsessed with control, and he even said in an interview that he is obsessed with possession, and this was both as a player and now as a manager. His teams want to keep the ball in the middle third. He doesn't want to play too many towards the back or too many in the further forward. He wants to really clog that middle third and hold a lot of possession in that area with short passes to draw teams out of position. And something that is absolutely key for Xavi, and he mentions it in most interviews, is numerical superiority and always having the spare man to be able to find them during build-up and to progress through the lines. In build-up, Xavi's side is very flexible. He looks to make that 3-2-5, sometimes makes a 2-3-2-3, or sometimes makes a 4-2-4. So he's very flexible in trying to find that spare man and finding that numerical superiority that we spoke about earlier. Xavi's side has averaged 64.9% possession this season, which is the most in La Liga, and is also at the second highest for short passes per game with 565, only 2 less than Real Madrid. Xavi wants his team to open up the pitch when they are in possession of the ball. He wants there to be a lot of width and a lot of depth. So what I mean by that is that the wingers go really high up the pitch to pin back the opposition defence, just to really open up the space in the middle of the pitch, and also in width, just to make sure that there's big spaces between the players so that they can play the ball and stretch out the opposition's press. Lastly, for the build-up section, I wanted to touch on the pivot and Xavi's use of his pivot, because he does a lot of things similar to a lot of different coaches in the sense of using his pivot in different ways. So at points, he will use his pivot in this sort of pivot wall style of formation, where his pivot play really close together to draw players towards them as a decoy, to then allow the interior players in behind. So the likes of Pedri, sometimes Xavi, like all these Barcelona, these interior players that play behind that last line in that zone 14 area, they're able to then receive the ball in that area and affect the game, because the pivot players, by creating that wall, they are pushing the opposition press upward, and they're allowing the centre-backs to play past them and miss them out in the middle of the pitch and go straight directly into that zone 14 area. But the other thing they do is also making sure they're at staggered heights in the pivot. So they'll make sure they're never really parallel to each other. This is like what I mentioned in my De Zerbi video that his pivot do. It's to make sure that you can make those third man combinations to then get out and play if the space is there to do so. So De Jong will drop a bit deeper. He'll then play a little bounce pass off of whoever's in the middle with him. So say Christensen on occasion, say Gundogan if he's dropping in and he's not playing in the higher role. It really depends. But he's trying to make those combinations in those short passes of play to then attack the space that is being created by drawing in the opposition press. So they use that pivot in many different ways, but they are the soul and the hub of the team. So as we mentioned, Xavi likes to stretch the pitch, make sure his wingers are high and stretch it wide and long in attacking possession and just in his attacking patterns. But what this means is also that he can isolate his wingers on the out wide so they can get 1v1. So that's why you've seen people like Yamal look so good this season, who is such a high quality dribbler, 1v1 specialist. He's been able to get into those positions and just beat his fullback 1v1 and then create from there. So by isolating those wingers, it gives them the opportunity to get 1v1 more times in a game. And the higher amount of chances they get to do that, the higher percentage you get from those players to make something happen. Something Xavi's team do to get the ball to the isolated winger is they'll overload one side of the pitch. So they'll play very asymmetrical towards one side of the pitch, and then they'll look to overload to then isolate the other side of the pitch, and then one switch the ball can then get that fullback or that whoever's on that wide area. So sometimes it's Cancelo out wide. If it's Yamal, it would be a winger. To get that 1v1 to then be able to go 1v1 with the fullback, get at the player, and then either deliver the ball into the box, beat the man and shoot, or create and get into the box from there. However, as we've spoken about Xavi being so controlled, he's obsessed with possession, he is not afraid for his team to be direct when possible. He wants his team to attack the spaces that are created. He's all about creating space with movement and runs in behind. And if you can be direct from the back, then you, at all means, you can do that. Ter Stegen does it at times from goal kicks. Sometimes it will be one of the centre-backs, as I said, using the pivot wall to get it directly into the zone 14 area with the interiors. Sometimes it will even be a centre-back playing a long switch to the isolated winger, and that's one pass to get to the isolated winger, and you're already in the attacking third, making something happen. He wants his team to do this, but only when it is on. So you will sometimes see certain games where they play a lot more direct, and that's because the team's pressing a lot higher. And then some games when teams are a little bit off, they'll look to sustain attacks a bit longer, shorter passes. So he's flexible in that sense. He doesn't only want to play tiki-taka, really short style football. He's willing to go direct if the spaces are there to be exploited. I did also just want to touch on Xavi's ability to problem solve and make changes during a game tactically to help his team and to provide that tactical edge during a game. As we've seen this season, he's used Christensen as a DM when they needed to add more security. That worked very well. He's very comfortable on the ball. He added that extra security in rest defence for them. And that was due to some DM injuries for Barcelona. So that worked very well. That was, again, him using him in a different role, but knowing the style and the skill set that he wanted for that position. Again, he's not afraid to promote youth. He's brought through Yamal and Kubrasi this season, the centre-back and the young winger. Both been excellent. Both showed their quality in those Champions League ties against PSG, even though they have gone out. Kubrasi dealt with Mbappe really well, I thought, at times. Yamal, he unfortunately got substituted early in that game against PSG in the second leg due to the red card to Araujo. But again, he made the first goal in that game. He got 1v1 isolated on the wing. He beat his man and he put the ball into the box in a danger area, and it hit Rafinha. He didn't know much about it, but Rafinha attacked the box and they got a goal from it. Yamal is dangerous in those 1v1 positions. Despite only being 16, he is brilliant, and Xavi is not afraid to promote the youth if they are going to affect the game and they are going to do the jobs that he wants them to do on the pitch. This is something that cannot be disregarded because most teams want their managers to promote youth if the opportunities are there to do so. And if they can problem solve with whatever they've got in the squad, that's also a very good sign. Lastly, let's touch on Xavi's defensive structure. He wants his team to counter-press. He wants his team to swarm the ball and get the ball back. As we said, he's obsessed with possession, so he wants to counter-press and he wants to regain the ball when he can. You see a bit of a mixture in the shape in the press, so sometimes you'll see a 4-2-3-1, sometimes you'll see them drop into a 4-4-2, which can then also drop into a 4-5-1 block if they drop deeper. So those shapes can change, but the principle of going man-to-man in the opposition third and then dropping into a deeper shape to make sure they're compact and harder to beat if the opposition get into their half stays the same. This is where it comes back to numerical superiority that we spoke about earlier. By having those deep overloads and having the extra man during possession, it means if they do turn the ball over, they have enough bodies in their rest defence structure to then swarm the ball, counter-press and get the ball back. So they're not leaving themselves too exposed anywhere on the pitch. Even when they are higher up the pitch, they've always got that overload centrally, at least with their 3 centre-backs and the 2 pivot, that they have a very secure rest defence structure to win the ball back and in close proximity to then do so, and that helps their defensive structure. When I was watching Xavi do a little tactical breakdown of his strategy, I liked his analogy that he used of an accordion. So in possession, they want to expand and they want to make themselves very hard to beat. Like I said earlier, they want to be high and wide, they want to pin teams back, and they want to make as much room in the middle for them to play. But off the ball, they want to tighten by, he says, 10 to 15 metres. They want it to be really hard to get them to play through. They want to be in tighter proximity so that when they do press, they can press together over shorter distances. So that accordion analogy of expanding and then tightening, I really like that from Xavi, and I think that really encapsulates how his team plays. But of course, there's another thing that needs to be said, which is, as we said earlier, he is obsessed with possession, and even in defensive structure, it's important to note that he always says that you suffer less when you keep the ball. So keeping more possession, having 64.9%, as we said earlier, they're giving themselves less and less chances to defend because they are in control of the ball. You cannot be beat if you have the ball. You cannot suffer when you have the ball. So this is a key principle of Xavi, and he drills it into his players. So now let's talk about how Xavi could set up with Chelsea, and on screen is the lineup, or a lineup that he could use if he was to join the club. This would of course see Enzo as one of the controlling midfielders, so much like a Frankie de Jong type, sitting in a bit deeper as a deep line playmaker and connecting the play. He'd get a lot of touches under a manager like Xavi, who wants to emphasise keeping the ball and progressing with purpose, but then as well, he wants to go direct at times, as I said earlier. So Enzo, again, he's a brilliant direct passer. He'd get a lot of usage out of Enzo in deeper areas as well as connecting areas in the middle of the park. So someone like Enzo, imagine someone like Enzo with Xavi's tutelage. I just think that's one of the perfect managers to unlock the abundance of talent that you have in Enzo Fernandez and what he's actually perfect for. This system does require fullback versatility because they can be asymmetric at times, as I said earlier, with Cancelo pushing a little bit higher on the left, Koundé sort of playing as a right centre-back from right-back to make that 3-2, and Cancelo pushing on to be basically a winger. So I think with Gusto and James, they can sort of do both quite well. On the left, I think you'd have to acquire a more physical profile, because Cucurella can play that sort of left centre-back inverted role, but maybe not so much as a left winger, whereas Chilwell can do the left winger, but he's not so much of a inverter. So I think maybe a left back, a more physical profiled left back, who's a bit more like Reece and Gusto, but on the left hand side, who's also very good at recovery defending to defend behind Enzo. I think that's what you need. So a Bradley Locko, a Dorgu, that sort of player. Of course, a massive part of the game would be the isolated wingers. So again, I think you could bring one in. Somebody that I think would be brilliant in a Xavi system would be Nico Williams. He would be a brilliant signing in a system where he's isolated to go 1v1 and be that 1v1 threat. Mudryk, I think he could really thrive in that role if coached very purposefully to do this. Madueke could do it on the right. So I think wingers-wise, Angelo as well, if he came back. I think wingers, there's a lot of talent, and we could also go and acquire a more 1v1, another 1v1 specialist. But Madueke and Mudryk both have those aspects in them. They like to carry the ball. They are ball carriers, especially Madueke. When he gets his head down and he's 1v1, he's very dangerous. So I think Xavi would work with these two as wide isolated wingers. And I think they could work under a manager like Xavi, much like I have said with De Zerbi, who isolates the wingers to be 1v1 threat. Then you have the interior players, so the ones that are receiving between the lines in Zone 14. So again, this would be a Palmer, a Carney Chukwuemeka, and these types of players. One could start in the 10, one could start on the right. So for example, Palmer could start on the right, he could drift in, sort of like what Rafinha's been doing on the left. He drifts inside more. Palmer could do that role. Gusto or James could be the higher player on the right to be the width. So then you have Palmer as one of the interiors, one of the ones receiving in Zone 14 and creating from that area, much like Pedri or these types. Carney as well. He's another that can do both. He could play off the left and invert, but also he could just start in the 10 and he could occupy that zone. He's very strong on the ball, capable of receiving. He can also drive, so if he had to drop deep to receive it and create an overload, a numerical superiority, as we spoke about earlier, if he dropped in, he could drive the team forward from this area. So I think Carney and Palmer would be very perfect interiors in a Xavi system. But also, it is important that when these players push high and they go man-to-man, to make and force that ball to go long. They want the ball to come over the top and force that ball long so that they can then win those 1v1 duels, like an Araujo does. This is where someone like Fofana, Colwill could do this well as well, or a new signing like a Diamande. I think that's where you need a more physical profile, who is a bit quicker with recovery speed, better at jumping and sort of anticipating and being aggressive in the press and backing up the midfield to tighten the spaces. So I think this is what we miss when we don't have Fofana. And I think this is what Araujo does for Barcelona very well. So I think you need those strong recovery-based centre-backs, but also ones that are good on the ball and they can break the lines. So Levi Colwill, perfect for that. And of course, then you'd have Nicholas Jackson or a new signing, but I'll talk about Nicholas Jackson because I think he could be good to drop in and almost like De Zerbi, where his striker drops in and the wingers actually hold the width, same as Arteta does sometimes when he starts Havertz or Jesus. They drop in a bit. The wingers are the more advanced and they're pinning the opposition defence back. So a player like Jackson, he's very good at dropping in, linking up play. He can play with his back to goal. He can turn and he can drive the team forward. He can also run in behind and stretch. He's quick. He's good on the ball. He's a good dribbler. So I think Xavi would work well with him, and I think he'd be able to do what Xavi wants from his strikers in terms of link-up play, stretching the game, and all those aspects. So, what do you think will happen with Xavi? Do you think Barcelona will try to convince him to stay, although I don't think that's likely? Do you think he takes a year off and then assesses his options next summer, in which case could Chelsea be on the table? That's the question I'd like to answer, or I'd like to be answered. Xavi, for me, he makes a lot of sense. I think the fact that he's willing to work with youth, the fact that he would get a lot of the best qualities out of our best players, like Enzo, like the wingers that we've bought for big fees that are good in 1v1 scenarios. I just think you want to make that midfield a priority, and I think Xavi would. I think we're a better side when we keep the ball for longer periods. I know that it doesn't look like that this season because of the way we're playing, and we are playing some good games in transition, like we did. We just beat Everton 6-0 in Chelsea's case. But I do think Xavi would be a good fit for Chelsea if we was to wait until the summer 2025 window and he took a year off and then we went in for him next summer. So what do you guys think? Would you like to get Xavi? What do you think his fit would be like at Chelsea? Where do you think he'll end up? And all that stuff. Let me know in the comments. And I think my next video, at least my next manager video, is going to be on Stuttgart's Sebastian Hoeneß. So keep an eye out for that.